You ever find yourself scrolling online or maybe talking with a friend or a family member and you're just completely baffled by something they believe? Something that just seems so out there. It's easy to just write it off, right? But have you ever really stopped and wondered why people believe in these huge secret plots? Here's a hint. It has almost nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with how our brains are wired. So today, we're going to take a deep dive into the psychology behind it all. Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to break down the anatomy of a conspiracy theory, what it's actually made of. Then, we'll get into the three big psychological hooks that make them so darn appealing. After that, we'll look at the mind of a believer, touch on the very real consequences these beliefs can have, and wrap up by talking about how we can build some mental armor against them. All right, first things first. Before we can get into the why, we really need to get on the same page about the what. So let's lock in a solid understanding of what a conspiracy theory actually is, and just as important, what it isn't. So let's be really clear here. This isn't just about having a different opinion or an alternative viewpoint. The absolute heart of a conspiracy theory, according to the research, is this very specific idea that some major event is not what it appears to be. That behind the scenes, there's a secret plan being carried out by a powerful, influential group that's actively hiding what they're doing. And it turns out, when you really look at them, pretty much all conspiracy theories are built from the same 5 core ingredients. First, you've got a pattern. It's all about connecting the dots. Second, there's agency, the belief that this is all happening on purpose. It's not an accident. Third, it involves a coalition, not just one lone wolf, but a whole group working together. Fourth, there's a threat, the idea that this group's goals are bad for the rest of us. And finally, the secret sauce, secrecy. This is the magic ingredient that makes the whole thing almost impossible to disprove. Okay, so we've got the recipe. Now for the really big question. Why is this recipe so compelling? Why do these stories grab hold of people? Well, the answer has way less to do with being gullible and everything to do with these really deep universal human needs that every single one of us has. You know, the research on this is pretty clear. These theories don't just pop up out of thin air. They take hold and they spread because they tap into 3 fundamental motives, 3 basic needs that are part of the human condition. First up, we've got what psychologists call our epistemic motive. It sounds fancy, but it's simple. We have a deep, driving need to know and understand what's going on around us. We are hardwired to search for explanations. So when things get chaotic or scary or just plain confusing, a conspiracy theory can feel like a lifeline. It offers a simple, neat and tidy answer to incredibly complex questions. It gives a sense of certainty, even if it's a false one.
Second is the existential motive. This is our need to feel safe, to feel like we have some control. Now, this one's a little bit of a paradox, right? You'd think believing in some evil, powerful group would make you feel less safe. But for a lot of people, the idea that someone, anyone, is in control is actually more comforting than the alternative, which is that awful, chaotic things can just happen for no reason at all. And that third hook, it's all about us. It's social. These beliefs can be a way to feel good about yourself and the groups you belong to. By pointing to some powerful, evil, other group as the source of all the problems, it can make your own group feel morally superior, or it can explain why your community is struggling. Okay, so we've covered the what and the why. Now let's zoom in a little bit on the who. Are there certain personality traits or ways of thinking that make a person more likely to find these theories persuasive? Well, the research says, yeah, absolutely. And at the very center of it all is something called illusory pattern perception. Look, our brains are pattern-finding machines. It's what we do. It's kept us alive for millennia. But sometimes that system goes into overdrive. It starts seeing meaningful connections and deliberate patterns in what is basically just random noise. We're all built to connect the dots. This is just about connecting dots that aren't actually there. And this leads to some really fascinating findings. For instance, studies have found a link between conspiracy beliefs and narcissism. But here's the wild part. It applies to both major types. You have the classic grandiose narcissism, that feeling of being superior and better than everyone else. But then you also have vulnerable narcissism, which comes from a place of deep insecurity and defensiveness. They seem like total opposites, but what they share is an underlying tendency towards paranoia, which can make a person much more open to ideas about secret plots and hidden enemies. So, at this point, you might be thinking, okay, this is some interesting psychology for sure, but so what? Who cares? Well, this isn't just some abstract thought experiment. These beliefs don't stay in people's heads. They leak out into the real world, and they have very real, very significant, and often very negative consequences for all of us. All right, now check this out. This chart gives us some actual data on what happens. Researchers looked at the overall sentiment of tweets, basically how positive or negative they were. The first set of bars, that's the baseline, with no intervention. But look at what happens when people are just exposed to misinformation. That sentiment takes a nosedive. The data clearly shows that this stuff makes our public conversations measurably more negative and hostile. And those effects, they just ripple outwards from there. Study after study has shown how these beliefs can fuel prejudice against groups, be used to justify violence, and convince people to ignore critical public health advice. And bigger picture, they slowly chip away at our trust in major institutions like science and government, and just pour gasoline on the fires of political polarization.
I know it's a heavy topic, and it can sound a little bleak, but the story absolutely does not end there. The whole point of understanding this is not to throw our hands up in despair, but to actually empower ourselves. And researchers are making real progress on strategies to help us build resilience against all this misinformation. For a long time, the main strategy was debunking, running around fact-checking claims after they've already spread. But that's basically a never-ending game of whack-a-mole. It's purely reactive. So now the evidence is pointing to a much more powerful proactive approach called pre-bunking. The whole idea is to inoculate people, to arm them against manipulation before they ever encounter it. Think of it literally like a vaccine for your brain. By exposing people to a tiny weakened dose of a manipulation tactic, say teaching them what a false dilemma is or how scapegoating works in a controlled, safe way, you help their minds build up cognitive antibodies. They learn to recognize the techniques themselves, so when they see them out in the wild, the alarm bells go off. So at the end of the day, understanding all this psychology isn't about judging other people or feeling smug. It's really about self-awareness. It's about recognizing these tendencies in our own minds. We are all pattern seekers. Every one of us craves certainty and a sense of belonging. So the real challenge isn't to stop ourselves from connecting the dots. It's to be more mindful and more critical about the patterns we choose to see.